Blessings and welcome back, everyone, to our 25th episode in our journey through the zodiacal phases. I'm Elsa, and I'm joined again today by KD Dayton and David Fisher. Thank you both for being here. And we are here for Sagittarius1. Happy birthday, Sagittarius! So the dates for this are November 21st or 22nd through November 30th. To December 1st, depending on where you are. Austin Coppock calls this the poisoned arrow. Susan Chang calls this express delivery. And then we have the Lord of Swiftness coming in with the Ape of Wands card, which is the minor arcana card. We've got a big change coming from Scorpio into Sagittarius. Like, I really feel the change, and all the literature is like so much different. It's such a different vibe. We get this big jump into Jupiter, right? So Jupiter rules all of Sagittarius, and the Sagittarius card is Temperance, or the daughter of the reconcilers. So we've got Temperance as, you know, going to be joining us through the entire Sagittarius season. And we will definitely keep, you know, finding different iterations of this as we go, but we're introducing that as the Sagittarius card today. And then we've got
definitely glad it moved on from the Angel of Death to another one that's more amicable.
Oh my goodness, it's like, it honestly is like night and day going through. Like, when I started reading Susan, I was like, oh my god, like, it's such a mental and emotional shift. It really is. Even though we've got the poisoned arrow, I mean, we'll get to it. We'll kind of break it down, but it has such a different energy. And then we've got Mercury as the Decan Lord, so the co-ruler or sub-lord or whatever we've been calling it. So, you know, we get that swiftness of Mercury, but just to start out, and we can talk a little bit more about this because Susan has a really cool way of talking about this. But we know that Mercury and Jupiter take detriment in each other's signs. So I just wanted to kind of call that out straight out of the gate.
And it's also really interesting from the perspective that our last decan, Scorpio 3, was co-ruled by Venus, who finds her debility in Scorpio. And here we have Mercury, the very next decan, Mercury ruling as co-ruler, and has debility in Sag. So it's like going from one debilitated co-ruler to the next, despite that, exactly like you said, feeling so different this first decan.
You know, KD, and I remember talking about this with you. I forget what decan it is right now. You might remember when I bring it up, but I find Jupiter and Mercury to be one of those that I have an easier time reconciling their detriments. Like, I don't actually, personally, this could be a misunderstanding on my part, so you guys don't have to take this as, you know, canon or whatever, but it's like, I find them to be similar or work together in some kind of a way. Like, I know that Mercury is like more aligned with the details, but when you think of Mercury as the magician or Mercury as the alchemist, and you think of you know, Jupiter as like the priest or the philosopher or something like this, to me, you're working in the same wheelhouse. You're working in universities, you're working with magic, you're maybe working with religion. And I know Mercury is a deconstructionist, so it might be more like break, you know, so in this way I see its detriment. Like, Mercury would want to argue for the facts or break down religion or be like, well, why do you really believe this, and all of that, you know? But even in that case, I feel like they work really well together. But I understand how Jupiter is the big picture and Mercury is the details, and those things don't always mix. But when you have like the alchemist or Hermes Trismegistus, or you have Temperance, which is like an alchemical card of Sagittarius, you got like this bigger picture and the ability to transmute the particles or transmute the details to get like this bigger picture. So I don't know, I guess that just to say, in my mind, it's a complicated relationship, or kind of not maybe complicated, but maybe a nuanced relationship.
It really is. And I think that what you say is really important because, yeah, in a lot of ways we're trained to view some of these planets that find their debility in the other signs as opposites, because we have Saturn and the sun and moon, Saturn being darkness, the sun and moon being light. Those are opposites. We have Mars and Venus, one being love, one being war or peace and war. Those are opposites, but we don't have the same thing necessarily with Jupiter and Mercury. And that's the nature of all of Jupiter's and Mercury's signs being mutable and being very changeable, and in essence, amoral, without morality. It's a very different type of pairing.
Yeah, and it's a paradigm of morality, which is Jupiter or something, and belief and this magic. Like in a way, people think of belief as like magical thinking, right? Or religion is like magical thinking, like not fact-based.
And those are all Jupiter things. Those are all
yeah, exactly. And then you have Mercury, which is like the facts, but it's also like the liminal space of like bordering facts and being like the trickster and like all of these things. So it's really kind of interesting, like the breaking down of facts and the breaking down of belief and the alchemist. And you're right, all of those are very mutable qualities, and they can be in a juxtaposition, but also in a way more apt, and maybe this, you're right, it's because of its mutable energy, more apt to sort of blur those lines, you know, because and we talk about this when we talk about the Temperance card, about the coming together of extremes. So I think, you know, that has a lot to do with it as well, is like alchemy itself, like Hermes Trismegistus, which is Mercury, or Sagittarius, which is the, you know, alchemical card of temperance. You're kind of bringing together opposites to in this alchemical process. So I think, you know, that speaks to the mutability as well, whether big or small, you know.
You're right. Yeah. Actually, I remembered when we had this conversation last, it was during the first decan of Gemini, exactly half a year ago, because we have Jupiter as the co-ruler with Mercury as the lord of the sign. So it was the same situation reversed here. And yeah, Jupiter.
Yeah, I do just see them in the same wheelhouse, like a ninth house wheelhouse almost, or something like that, right? Like I see them
that ninth and third polarity.
Yeah, or like, you know, the student arguing with the teacher, like the debate team, like you only strengthen your like logic or your logos through like argument and thinking hard over a thing. And like, you know, I know that runs contrary to just like religion, just believe this thing. But when you think about like hope or something with Jupiter, or like the bigger picture, or like the heart, you get like the heart wanting to hope for something or wanting to believe in something, you know. I know that Mercury maybe is like, let's break that down, why we think about it, why we hope for it, why we believe it. But I think those things go really well together. Like, you know, maybe I'm just too Jupiterian and Mercurial to understand how they sort of parse out.
Same. I'm not one to speak about how they don't go well together. I mean, that's my whole chart.
Yeah, totally. But it's like, it's almost like they're working well together. And I mean, I guess you could say that for all the adversaries, right? Like Mars and Venus, war and love. You could say that about light and shadow. Like they have this polarity. So yeah, maybe, you know, let us know in the comments below your thoughts about where we're at with this one.
And one more thing about the kind of, I don't want to say opposite, but dichotomy of Mercury and Jupiter is that Mercury, and we should remember this later on as we talk through the tarot cards, is the god of deception, and Jupiter is considered the truth, which I think is really important to remember, especially when we get to those tarot cards.
Along with Venus, the truth, and along with the sun, right, or something like this. But yeah, you're right, and it does have that trickster. That's why I think, you know, we've got that poison on the arrow, right? So you've got this like swiftness, but you got a little of this trickster. So I think we definitely, that concept will come bearing all of its iterations as we go. I just wanted to start out by talking just a little bit about Sagittarius in general, like the sign Sagittarius, without going into like Valen's whole treatment of like all the qualities of Sagittarius. Are there things you guys want to bring up? Like for me, you know, it's one of the most, I guess, straightforward images and signs, which is we always see the centaur with the bow, like that's basically it. But I had this idea of like man and horse and like horsemen, and like hordes back in the day, or like trick riders, or people that were really, you know, engaged with their horses, almost like they were one, right? Like spinning down and shooting from below, and like being like almost like the horse was a part of you, right? And that reminded me of just, you know, like Genghis Khan, or like native cultures where they were just like really one with their horse. And then it just reminds me of like the idea of where we had desire in Scorpio, which was like really bodily and really kind of like broody and just really, you know, of the body. Here, when I think of like arrows and like horsemen, I feel like you get into that like man, right? Like the spirit of man on the vehicle of the horse. So maybe like spirit and matter coming together, or almost like the taming of desire, because you have like the horse, right, which is your animalistic like nature, but then you have like man who can have like ideals and like bring the horse to some kind of a, you know, goal or something like
It
that.
has strength card vibes to it, where we get into touch with our animal side, or our when I say animal side, I should say more of a instinctual side for us, something that is more like primal, something that is impulsive inside of you.
And to me, it's almost like a taming of the beast. I know that sounds like fucked up to say, but it's like you have your animal nature, but then you have that spirit and matter like definition, where you have like now the beast and the man who has these ideals are like one, and they move together in a certain sense or whatever.
Yeah, I think if we talk a little bit about the actual like mythology around the centaur beings, you really get the view of Sagittarius. And I say this as Sag rising, so I'm very strongly situated in that like archetype. But you know, classically there are some other gods, there are some other cards that really remind me of Sagittarius. Strength's a really good one, as is the Chariot. I really often associate the Chariot with Sagittarius as well. Even though it's the card of Cancer, which is in fact in Antitia to Sagittarius, but we'll go there another time. Centaurs in mythology were very wise. They were sometimes practitioners of alchemy, of medicine, as well as things like stargazing and navigation. But they were, as you said, Elsa, half man, half beast, or half horse. And so that man on top of the horse is in fact tempering or moderating the animal instincts of the beast below. Now, another thing that kind of comes to mind when you think of Sagittarius season is Dionysus or Bacchanalia. It's a time of a lot of darkness, but there's a lot of frenzied partying. There's an atmosphere of just like ecstatic release going on, and that is also a part of Sagittarius. This like party loving, this really desiring to feel the extremes of consciousness, of reality, is very much baked in as well. And that goes back to a sense of what centaurs did too. They were so wise and they had such visionary capabilities, but they were also belligerent, bloodthirsty partiers. and that dichotomy is held within the archetype of Sagittarius.
And I think we're going to see that come out when we see some of the renditions through the Picatrix and Agrippa and things like that. Like, and same with the poison arrow that Austin talks about, is you've got like a little bit of that like bloodlust in there. You've got a little bit of that animal nature in there. And I think it's interesting that you pull out the Chariot, because when I think of like horses, right, you think of horsepower. You think of vehicles, like horses were the first like vehicle for us even before we put a chariot behind them, right? And so it was like that idea of like man coming together with its mind and its intentions, harnessing the beast, right? And being able to like use that. When we think of like how much horsepower does the machine have or whatever, it has to do with how much oomph is behind it, how much speed is behind it, how much does it have behind where I can direct it to, where I can go, you know? So yeah, the Chariot is very much so.
Yeah, one other thing that I want to point out is that you get the Eight of, and this is going to be mentioned later, the Eight of Wands has no human image in it, and I think Katie, you're going to bring that up. But these other two cards have a magician, which is a human being, and another has an angel in it, which is a humanoid figure, but it's a higher representation of consciousness. So and creative force. It means that there are things working in your favor. It has a lot of the supportive Jupiterian nature of Sagittarius, and everything that falls in that sign being accompanied by a sense of, oh, how lucky, you know, how nice that circumstance decided to provide me with the material necessary for me to do what I needed to do. But then Temperance is a card that represents this sign, because we need to be made aware when we're treading through Sagittarian territory that fire is a powerful element and that we can't play with it at will. We have to be careful with how we direct it and where we place it and how we harness its power.
Yeah, and that just briefly, just quickly to interject, like the stealing of fire, right? Like the story of the stealing of fire, and you get Mercury there, and you get a little trickery or a little potential for, like what you were saying, misuse of fire or something like this, right?
And it's interesting that the Eight of Wands is it's a fire card, right? And we always thinking about speed almost in an air-like way, where we think of swiftness almost as this, even because there is an airy quality to the card. When you see the representation, you see the speeding up through the air. But it's a fire card. It's still representing action. It's still representing disruption in a lot of ways of the current scenario through your actions.
Yeah, and it is like you're using air as the medium, right? Because it's like swift or even stealth, right? Even tricky. Like you could be walking through the woods and you don't know you're about to get attacked, and all of a sudden, you know, you get an arrow or whatever it is, you know? So it's like, but the idea of like basically raining fire through the sky, like raining a weapon. So if fire is like weapons or something like this, right? You're using air as the medium, or like you even think of like horses back in the day. They were like said to be like almost like flying, or moving with such great speed they can move with the wind, or something, like ride like the wind or something like this. So you have air being this like metaphor for things like moving fast. But when you have like an arrow, you have, you know, you add fire to that, right? You add a target to that. You add action to that. You add intention to that. You know?
And in this Decan nowadays, we have the star, and it's only going to move, I think, further into this Decan because it moves backwards, I think, through the zodiac. It's Antares. We have Antares in this part of the zodiac. And this is nowadays. So this star that causes things to, it is also a star associated with the fire element, and it is associated with destruction. It is associated with, things kind of going awry in a chaotic kind of way.
Well, it's that word actually, Antares, literally means the enemy of Aries. So it's like the antagonist.
So, and so we have, I think, to be careful within this Decan, especially nowadays, living with the influence of this particular fixed star. And stars are angels as well, I feel like, because we need to be swift when we are dealing with matters associated with this part of the zodiac, but we can't be deceitful. We can't be untrue, like, because Mercury, again, as you guys were saying, is in detriment in this sign. And so the images that we will bring forth are not necessarily ones associated with the experience that the native has or that the person under this influence would have. So it would be good for, I don't know, acting or pretending to be something for a day. Like, I want to pretend that I am a rock star for a day because I am in this TV program or something. I don't know.
Yeah, the
this could be a good
express
thing.
delivery. But I agree, David, that like, you know, when I was looking just at the little white books for this, it was like almost like you can, like, if you get a spark of inspiration or an ideal or something, like, yes, now is the moment to act, it's to move forward, draw back, be ready, and let the arrow fly, right? But with that same element of being able to do that, or having the power to be able to do that, or the resources to be able to, you know, make the bow, draw the bow, you know, what are we really practicing even archery for? It's, we have an enemy in mind or something like this, right? And then also you have, so there's some violence in it, right? That's what I'm kind of saying. Or maybe you just use it for hunting, but anyways, there's some violence in it. But the tarot, I guess, warns us against like making hasty decisions or drawing back too swift or too quick into something, right? So it's like, obviously using the wisdom, I think, of Jupiter and seeing the big picture would definitely harness some of the Mercury's detriment here. Like Mercury maybe wanting to be quick, or, you know, like do it quick or act hasty, where I think kind of defaulting to the Jupiterian archetype of like trying to see the big picture and why you're doing something and all of that could temper some of the haste or the quick or the rash decisions. So another thing, I forget, there was a tarot reader at some point that had a different rendition of the Temperance card that I've just held with me. And I've seen it kind of like work in my psyche and work when I'm doing readings as well, as they called the Temperance card, or they used the Temperance card as a marriage significator. So if it's in a love reading, or if it's, you know, with the Two of Cups, or if it's with the Four of Wands, or if it's with, you know, different significators, or if you're talking about this, because you're making the two one, and what is now poured into the cups, like as we're pouring them back and forth, can't be sort of undone, right? Like once you start to pour two liquids together, you can't sort of take back out the two liquids. I mean, I guess you could say with science or like with different things, you could maybe, you know, or different kinds of like alchemical processes, maybe separate out the core elements again or something like this. But essentially, like if you have 1 cup of water and 1 cup of wine, once you start passing them back and forth, now you just have water and wine, right? So it's like that idea of kind of like a new thing that you can't come back from. And how that can be like, you know, sometimes a relationship significator, or, you know, something like this. Like once you alchemize with the thing, that's what you have now. You have like a new substance, a new complete thing. And it's, again, the two becoming one, essentially. And being kind of like overseen by like wisdom, or overseen by this angel, or the angel kind of coming down and saying like, okay, now the two are one. And so I thought, I just wanted to bring that up because I thought that was interesting, and I have seen it come up in that way in readings and in my life as well.
And you have this representation in the Apocalypse Tarot that is of a bowman shooting with a lot of arrows flying above his head. With the sun behind him, there's this lion represented as well here in the Eight of Wands. So, and all the arrows have fire at the tip. So again, that idea of action that you can't really take back, and this, you know, you have to direct it, like it is intentional. This can be a difficult card because it is acting according to your intentions. Like this will expose truth, whether you want it or not. Yeah, you are enacting your own truth, even if what you're enacting is fake. If it is discovered, if the true intent of it comes to light, your personality and the truth about you and that trickster side of you will be exposed as well. So it is dangerous, and you have to be very temperate when dealing with this kind of energy. It's like when you realize that life is giving you what you ask for, and you have to be careful while dealing with it, you know?
Yeah,
because it's
just like
in a fleeting moment, in a fleeting moment kind of way. This is not like a permanent thing.
Yeah, just like, you know, hordes on their horses with their bow and arrow or whatever. Like you can set your sights on, the pillage or the prize or whatever, but it doesn't come without like loss of life. It doesn't come with like all these other things. And I think like you mentioned the fiery arrow, right? Like that was a really swift, that was like a bullet back in the day, right? Like, and when we think about the poisoned arrow, we even get more like mercurial kind of trickery in there, because it's not a flaming arrow that you can see that's going to start everything on fire. It's like stealth and deceitful. Like you think it's just one arrow, but slowly it takes over the whole body type of thing. And again, that reminds me of the temperance card of like, now that the poison is mixed with the blood, there's sort of no going back.
Yeah, the magician is alchemizing, and if you put your intent onto something here, temperance with the magician is saying, all right, you put your mind to good use because I'm giving you a green light to, manifest into this earthly realm, whatever you want with these actions. And if you decide to throw a tantrum while I'm opening this window for you, then, well, what you're going to reap is going to be very interesting for you, but...
Yeah, I think like T. Susan talks about like, travel and swiftness. You could see like, I hate to bring it all the way here or whatever, but like if you think of like smuggling or whatever, like you could get away with smuggling, but for how long, right? Like, you can kind of like use that trickery to be like hiding in the woods with your poisoned arrow, but like what is the ramifications of that in the long term? And I think again, that's why using Jupiter like as your default mode here, to go to Jupiter and be like, what's the bigger picture, and like using Jupiter's beneficence to sort of answer to at this time, like the bigger picture and the benefic sort of like spiritual priest, like shaman like energy. Like you can get like good answers and do a lot of good here as well if you kind of revert to what does the wise man say, what does the shaman say, like what is the good alchemy here. Like if you can sort of give way to that Jupiterian overlord, shall we say, you're gonna get better results, I think. Just like a vehicle like with a lot of horsepower can like take you up the mountain, but also if you're operating the vehicle under the influence or whatever, you're gonna get like a disastrous result. And I think I might have said this earlier, but desire is sort of replaced by intention, or like desire is now like brought out of the body in the broodiness, and it becomes like will or intention. So it becomes like more directed, more action oriented. Again, not to be confused with like the air quality, but again, I go to that like spirit and matter type of thing. Like now we've got the beast that's tamed underneath us that can bring us directly to the goal. It's like, you have to be wise on how you think of that and what is the real intention, what is the real goal, because this is a decan of speed. That's like the main thing that Austin talks about here is speed. And how we can now move free, but it's directed by will alone, and how the spirit commands and all parts obey. So it's definitely commanding and obeying. So with Sagittarius, it talks about vision, and Austin says the vision just erupts here. So you can really get that alchemical vision. Again, think, shamanistic or religious zeal or something like this. It really comes up into the mind, into the spirit realm, and puts a real hefty amount of possibility under you to move forward.
Yeah, it has to do with the spiritual realm, as all those fire cards do in the tarot. Because, and I'm not sure if you ever said this, but the fire suit is associated with spirit because it is what moves you, basically. So think about it this way. We are kind of clay, made of clay, right? We are inanimate dolls made of clay, but what gives us the movement and intelligence are the spirits that are around us and that possess this mortal coil. There is our spirit, our main spirit, us. and there are the spiritual influences around us that spiritual part of us connects to. And I feel like the Eight of Wands, or this part of the zodiac, specifically the first decan of Sagittarius ruled by Mercury, are when our spirit and our matter, again, as you guys were saying, align in such a way that our consciousness can swift through circumstance. The dangerous part is to get carried away and confuse that particular moment for everlasting reality. That is not the nature of the mutable signs. This is just something to give you a taste of reality and how it can be in a particular way. Because anytime your spirit is poked in that way, meaning anytime you are allowed to do something you like by circumstance, or allowed to enact your intentions by circumstance in this manner, you become a little entitled.
Well, you make a good point again with the mutable. Let's remember that this is traveling. The arrow travels, the chariot travels, the horse travels. You're not talking about the horse, in the grazing in the field or whatever. You're talking about like going somewhere and doing something. And it's emboldened, again, that fire quality of like, when we think about like the sun being God or illumination, the sun is on fire, right? So it's like this idea of really lighting up. Like if you have an aha moment, or you have a bright idea, right? It's bright, it's fiery, a light has been turned on. And like, fire is the first light, right? Like it's always upward, it's always spreading. And so we're going to talk about that spreading too, because Austin is going to talk about viral, like something going viral, right?
But let's talk just about, in sense of viral, it could be also infecting someone with anger, infecting someone with defensiveness in a way, because you feel like someone is open to your attacks, for instance, and you keep poking at wounds that are going to flare them up. But you do that out of just, I know I can do that, so I'm going to do that. It's irresponsible, and it's using some power that you have over the person in an entitled manner, as if you held the power for that just because you know something, just because, again, you have the information, you can manipulate the experience that someone has of reality. And so that they have a certain wound in their spirit, you attack that in particular. This could be a low manifestation of the Eight of Wands.
That's the lower polarity of Mercury, right? Like infecting someone with gossip. You can infect someone with your ideas. That's what religion is. It's infectious ideas, whether positive or negative, right? So you get Mercury as the magician using language or logos to like infect the ideas of the population or the person, right? You can use words to sort of cut or diminish or spread gossip or uplift someone if it's not for those Jupiterian ideals of bringing someone up with your words.
The Sagittarian and fiery elements bring to attention the action that cannot be taken back.
It calls to mind, everybody's talking about infecting with belligerence or war, but there's also the phrase enthusiasm is contagious.
Yeah.
There's other types of infection too that can happen. Being euphemistic just to kind of stand up for another side of Sagittarius. But what you just said, David, really reminds me of the myth of Chiron, the wounded healer centaur. Is the mortally wounded but able to take care of the others. It was like kind of a almost father of medical practices sort of situation. So that's an interesting myth too when you think about it in relation to Sagittarius season and centaurs.
Yeah, and that's the shaman too. It's like if we're not willing to like look at our traumas, or if we don't have a physical wound that we want to heal or learn how to heal, then how do we like do that for ourselves, then again do that for others? And I agree, KD, like, and I'm not just talking like on the lower polarity, you have like infecting people with gossip or bad ideas, or like tricking an army by spreading a rumor or something like this. But you also have absolutely the positive side of that. And I was hoping to allude to it. I'm glad you expressed it more clearly, because that's what religion is. Like infecting someone with hope and inspiration. And what is hope and inspiration if it's not like an infectious, like enthusiastic, like laughter is contagious, like vibes are contagious, right? Like, and that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about alchemy. We're talking about like subtle things, right? Like subtle feelings and vibes, or subtle words that we can use. This is all like Mercury, like the subtle, right? But then the big ideas of Jupiter, like infecting someone with like, how do you inspire entire communities to get behind?
I will
religion?
use an example. I will use a Bible example. Because there's a story from Paul going through Athens where I think him and Peter were going to evangelize people, as you do. And they were looking at this statue of this unknown god that the Greeks had erected to this unknown deity, just in case they were leaving someone out and they didn't know who to thank for certain, happenings that were favorable for them. And so Paul came in and said, y'all know who that God is? It's my God. So you guys have been already worshiping him for a while. So how about that? And so he just introduced that concept to the Greeks and to the Athenians and being like, hey, it's something that you guys already know, but you haven't been able to acknowledge him because you have been waiting for someone to clarify who this deity is. And apparently there was a prophecy that he was probably aware of because he was very literate in Greek language and Greek philosophy and stuff, about a person who would clarify who that deity was one day. And Paul kind of said, oh, this is my cue. And this is something that we are talking about in relation to the Eight of Wands, in relation to Mercury, in relation to coming up and just owning a story to make up some experience in other people's minds, and infect people with the ideal of something to make them act that out. This was very effective. This is a very effective, according to
that was an effective little trick of Christianity.
Yes, as you can see, it had an effect on people.
All right. So, okay. So I won't go on about the poison of Christianity. I will be respectful to all you Christians out there. And
well, Mercury is debilitated.
All right. We've got swift transport, right? With swift transport of the body because of the mind. And then we've got the power. So one is moved in accordance with the vision. So that's where you again get that spirit and matter, vehicles, horses, chariots, things like this. So then Austin talks about the bow being the vehicle for the arrow. And the arrow is the body and the will is the bow itself. And then we've got the Yavana Jataka, so which is pretty straightforward. A man whose bow is drawn and whose speed is violent as horses. So we can really feel that, right? Like if you think of just like a horde of just horses moving forward, like just the innate, like I don't know if you all have been around that, but the ground is rumbling, right? With all of these, like the movement, which again plays to that mutability and some of the violence. And then the 36 heirs of the zodiac talks about the daimones of plague. So I think that is really interesting, right? And that's where we start to get these infectious, spirits. So like back in the day, they thought disease or whatever was like a spirit that was infecting your body, like taking you over or something like this. And again, what we just talked about, like infecting someone with gossip or infecting someone with laughter, or, all of those things work here.
Remember, we're just vessels.
Yeah, and it's that infectious kind of like group think, like pylon, cancel culture, like all those kinds of things are here because so the arrow, the chariot, and viruses, right? And we are just this biome, right, of like moving, like our bodies, right? So
we're never the same person. Every 7 years our bodies completely change, cell formation. It's a completely different human being altogether from the previous 7 years.
Yeah, and if you think about like just the potential for violence in viruses, like it doesn't necessarily have to have this malefic, it doesn't have to be like gossip or whatever, but just the idea of, so like now we just have, you know, a video goes viral, right? It has a potential for violence in it, but it doesn't even need to be like a malefically charged idea. It just takes off, it just goes viral, like viruses in the body, right? They just sort of, there's an imbalance and something just, it still has that same capability for movement, I guess you could say. So I think we see that as the overarching theme of Mercury being able to do like all the small things very, very fast, and Jupiter being able to like have these big swaths of, you know, people or land or energy or big ideas, right? And those two together can just make something, you know, go viral, like a virus would, like little particulates in the air and global, you know, spread or whatever. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, Agrippa talks about boldness, which, you know, we see definitely with the fire of Sagittarius and the horse-like energy and the boldness of mind. We see liberty, but also Agrippa talks about malice. So there's really not too many authors that don't talk about this as being like liberty and boldness, but also malice. And so we have to sort of, I guess, reconcile that or put that together or something like this. That horses and arrows, they're charging at something, the enemy, or into new territory, or, you know, on their righteous quest, or on their, you know, liberating religious footing or something like this, right? So we have definitely, you know, a little bit of, you know, contempt.
Remember, with fire, there is a connection with intention. There is a form coming through in reality. And all of the fire signs, really, they inspire enmity. Aries, Leo, if you remember Leo, you have the five of that baton. How do you say that? Five of Wands and the Seven of Wands. And here you have the Eight of Wands that we were talking about, and the other cards that are also difficult to deal with of the one suit. It is something that causes a reaction from people around when they enact, these natives that have fire heavy charts enact their will upon the reality around them. It bothers a lot of people.
Antares.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about fire, right, it warms you up and it allows you to see. Okay, that's awesome. It allows everything on earth to grow because of the sun. Okay, cool. You also have fire, which cooks and makes medicines and makes poisons and you know, it's the alchemical process that you have fire. Fire changes the constitution of something, right? So, okay, that's middling, that's medium. But then you also have like wildfire and the ability to use fire as a weapon, right? So, and, you know, fire is a very intense and destructive force as well.
And it can also be purifying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've got all that complexity built in here when we're talking about Sagittarius, especially with Jupiter, because you know, here we've got Mercury, which kind of defiles it a little bit, but ideally, like, Jupiter is the guru, Jupiter is the greater benefic, so it wants to have a positive vision. It wants to spread good news or whatever it is. But with Mercury, we can see how that gets tainted or poisoned or gossiped, or, you know, kind of its polarity is sort of drugged down into, you know, poison or secret or, you know, yeah, gossip, all that.
I just wanted to bring up the Picatrix. I don't really know what it means. So if you guys are aware of the colors, associations, and magic of that time, let me know in the comments. But it says that it rises in the first phase of Sagittarius, the bodies of 3 men, and one body is yellow, the other is white, and the third is red. This is a phase of heat, heaviness, growth in plains and fields, sustenance, and division. So heat, sustenance, division, what?
And this is its form.
And this is its form. But I don't really understand the colors and the 3 divided men rising, except, you know, there are different humors perhaps to a man. Yeah, but I couldn't really make out.
Yeah, and when we're talking about the Picatrix, we're talking about this medieval text that's like very a lot of it's coming from a lot of different traditions, right? And it's coming later in the traditions. Can you mention the colors in the men again? Would you want to read it the second time for the
The men are yellow, white, and red.
I know that yellow in tarot, so I'm speaking only from tarot now. These colors, white represents purity, red is passion, and yellow is a sort of like
Fertility
spiritual
or
higher consciousness. It's like the
okay.
Hierophant wears it, for instance, in the death card that we saw last time. It's kind of like
A solar.
yeah.
That's exactly where I was gonna go with the Katie. Where you have red being like the fire of passion, white the purification of fire, and yellow the illumination of fire. So those
So maybe
kind
the
of,
three together are a temperance influence, right?
yeah, like you're tempering. So this is a great time to talk about like tempering in general. Like KD, I think you were going to talk a little bit about tempering foods and swords and just the idea of temperance. But yeah, that would be David, right? Is like we have to temper or tame the horse, right? With our like spirit or logical man mind, right? We can't just let the horse go wild. We tame it and we use it for our direction, right? So it's the same thing as like tempering something to use it for our use, to direct it forward. And same with like using, yeah, like you said, like the humors of the components of the possibility of man, like moving into one thing, that it's now balanced and more useful and more directed.
Those are colors, by the way, that are mimicked. I don't know if we want to move on to the tarot yet, but those are colors that are also mimicked. You're good at that? Okay. So let me throw up the cards on my screen here, just to demonstrate. Those are colors that are mimicked in the Temperance card for the Rider-Waite-Smith version of Temperance. You see on the far left, the wings are red, the angel is in a white robe, and of course we have the golden chalices and the sun, which is actually a crown in the background here. And so those colors, I think, make a lot of sense to pay particular attention to when thinking about temperance as the card representative of this sign, Sagittarius. An Aleister Crowley called this card also art, which I find really interesting because it's in reference, as T. Susan Chang illuminates in her book, it's in reference to alchemy as the great art or the great work. So alchemy is a really strong theme that comes through here for a lot of the reasons we've already discussed. That's also a very strong theme in the Magician card. So it's going to be coming from both rulers, that alchemy definition comes through in the Lord of Swiftness or the Eight of Wands. So a couple other things to note about the Temperance card are the representation of the triangle on the chest. Triangles are they're very magical, and in alchemy as well, they're very magical symbols. But from an astrology perspective, where we come from, trines are the certain geographic configuration that looks like a triangle over a chart. And this is a very positive and supportive aspect, and it's said to be the nature of Jupiter, which makes perfect sense because Sagittarius is Jupiter's sign. Now, tempering a little bit, so let's talk about the process of tempering and what that is. Tempering, when we're thinking, it's best explained through analogy. Tempering in, for instance, metallurgy is when you have a sword that you've been pounding, melting, getting into its shape, and you stick it in really cold water so that it solidifies and it stays in that formed shape. That's one example in metallurgy. Another example is in cooking. And in cooking, you temper things like chocolate, for instance, where you melt it very, very slowly, put it into whatever mold or get it in whatever form you need, and then freeze it, make it cold again so that it stays in that form. And the idea of this being that you're taking two extremes to make something when it comes back together in the middle, aka room temperature for swords and cooking. So that process of tempering can be extrapolated more abstractly to mean something spiritual, to mean you as an individual are going to two different extremes in order to find the middle way. Sometimes you could think of tempering as just being moderate or moderating, but that's not actually what it is. It's not like just the middle or just the average of something. It actually requires a lot of effort. If you've ever tried to temper some chocolate, it's a pain in the ass because you have to pay very close attention to what you're doing. And I think that's the same here in temperance. You have to be actively involved in order to get to that middle.
Yeah, and I think that's again where Jupiter and Mercury really come together, because you have to pay attention to the details, right? Yep. And it can be like an arduous process or something like this. But again, we go back to that like idea of like shamanism, where Mercury and Jupiter, I think, meet, which is, how do you know what a balanced middle is? You have to be able to have gone through the extremes, and we do go through the extremes in Scorpio, right? And then we come out from the underworld, essentially, of like going through the extremes of like the death card and the sun card and the tower card and like all of those things. We go through those extremes and we come out knowing that there's a possibility of a middle way, or that there is a harmonious aspect, right? There is a harmonious trine somewhere available to us. And in this case, like David said, it's represented by this like angelic figure, or the Sun King, or something like bigger. You even see like the angels kind of illuminated crown, third eye and crown chakra, something like this. So it's like you get the possibility of harmony only from going to your depths and to your extremes. And that's how something becomes stronger too. Like if you think of a sword being tempered, you do that for strength and support and stability and things like that. And we sort of have to reconcile the extremes, and we've had to have done that in order to find something balanced and harmonious and middle way,
Yeah.
So it's not just kind of being milquetoast and like, I'll just be like in the middle or whatever. Like, I don't want to be too like extreme. It's like very much that shamanistic sense of like having gone through the heavens and through the hells, and being able to come back like representing like this mixture of heaven and hell, this harmony, right, of these two cups merging as one, this triangle coming together, this good news. Like if you think of, even an angel, it's coming from God, Jupiter or whatever, right? And it's giving you a message, again, like Mercury. It's like giving you a good message of the good news of like how you can bring together these extremes and how you can find harmony and like this.
Yeah. I think another something you just said really called to mind something that Chang references in her chapter on this Decan, which is, or actually, no, this was in the Mother Peace book. Mother Peace talks about a good kind of analogy for the temperance card being the middle way of Buddhism, because you don't ever actually accomplish something. You're just constantly working towards the very narrow path that is the one towards enlightenment. It's like very yeah,
it's interesting, like you mentioned the very narrow path, because you're sort of taking, in the middle path, you're sort of taking things away and away and away until you find yourself on this narrowed path. But I was going to mention the narrowed path that we see in the Rider-Waite deck.
Yes.
Because to me, that narrow path, like it could be leading to this, from the mountains and from this place, like it could be leading to this oasis, this river of knowledge that we see, in the High Priestess card, that we have actually water here. We have so many elements here, right?
So many elements,
we have a very elemental position, just like we do in the Magician card. We have all the 4 elements. So you have this land path, right, representing the earth, and then you have these flowers, and then you have, again, the angel dipping its toes into the primordial sacred waters that we know we've gotten from the High Priestess. But then we get the Sun King. We really have it all. But I think when we're talking about like the extremes and like getting to this path, that's getting to this whatever moment of the trine, of enlightenment, of the mixing, of the alchemy, the shamanic way, it's because you've had to go through this arduous and narrow path through the mountains. Like you've had to go up and down through heaven and hell and through beauty to get to this, you know, kind of secret or sacred place where we see this angel at this, you know, spot of oasis, or, you know, and then we've got the flower here, which is the iris. So we could talk a little bit about that if you guys don't mind.
Yeah, let's definitely. The one thing that I want to say before we move on to the irises, though, because I think this is like a really good transition into the magician card as well. But so before we go there, one of the things that when I was first understanding the schema of what major arcana cards go with which astrological sign, I noted that this card actually does look very similar to depictions of Aquarius, or the water bearer that we would see, which is an air sign that's still yet to come, so look out for those videos. But the card that actually represents Aquarius is the star. So this card is Sagittarius. We mentioned the triangle, which is the nature of Jupiter, makes perfect sense. But what I find interesting about it on a deeper level is that even though this might look like an Aquarian card, the nature of the middle, the nature of tempering, and the nature of moderation is one that requires constant movement and mutability, which we've talked about a little bit before. So that element of tempering between, you know, all the different elements going on in this card is really crucial, I think, to the meaning of it and getting the feel for what that constant effort looks like. It's literally constant moving towards the middle.
It's interesting you mentioned the water bearer. I do like the cup bearer and the water bearer, but we also just, you know, maybe we can talk about this more when we do get to the star card. The star card is like universally known as the card of hope, right? And so we've got another theme there. And then we also have, in a lot of depictions in the star card, again, this pool of water or this river where either you're dipping another vessel into, or dipping a toe into, or having one vessel pouring onto land, or one vessel pouring onto water. That same idea of like one toe in the water, one on land, or one vessel pouring into the water, drawing the water, one onto land. So it's interesting to see or to note that here. If nothing else. Yeah,
we might compare later on.
yeah.
So this figure, this angel, I put a few different depictions from different tarot decks in here that actually show the angel or the figure flying, because I think it's really relevant for the Mercury vibe that we're going to get into later with the movement and the messengers and the swiftness. But we actually should take a look at who this figure is. There's a few different, I guess, schools of thought, but one interesting piece is that this might be the goddess Iris, who is the goddess of messengers, so kind of like a counterpart to Mercury. Iris is also the goddess of rainbows, which surprisingly, I swear to God, if you would have told me that there was a rainbow in this card, I'd believe you. Apparently the only rainbow is in the 10 of Cups, I believe. Yeah. Anyway, but that would have made sense in the background of this card because it has that vibe.
In the Illuminati deck, you have this rainbow depicted in the background, just so you guys can see here. That's all I was going to say. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and Isis being a messenger and Mercury being a messenger. And then also, what were we saying with the rainbow? David, in Portuguese, you say rainbow, like, what is it? Can you tell me again?
Arco-iris, which means basically Iris's bow.
Bow and arrow, there it is again. We got some really strong bow and arrow and rainbow vibes going on throughout this this Decan. So maybe we could say that's the emoji, a rainbow. Drop it below.
Ooh.
Drop a rainbow below.
A rainbow below for Sag1.
I love it.
We also have the iris flowers in the corner of this card, so I feel like that kind of backs up a little bit that this might actually be related to the goddess Iris. But I had another question for you, David, as our resident sort of Christian expert, Christian whisperer.
Yes, dear.
There were some people that I saw online talking about this potentially being the angel Gabriel. I don't know what sort of stories surround that or if it has anything to do with temperance. but I thought it was interesting.
Girl, I don't know, but no Gabriel that I've ever met was very temperate in humor. I have to tell you that. So
Reels are pretty pretty extreme.
Let me look in the Hermetic deck real fast and see what we see.
Yeah, I feel like the question of who this is, a third theory that I've read is that that's actually the Fool in some enlightened state. Although I don't know how he got wings. So
well, the idea of the Fool's journey, right, is that it's all kind of the Fool through the journey. But let us know in the comments below if you have any idea of, is this Gabriel? Is it, you know, what archangel is being summoned here?
yeah. Do we want to
Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, whatever the name of the other one is.
Sesquihel. And we also have something about the foot on the stone, one on the stone, one in the water, which is also important for kind of depicting this opposition inherent in temperance, that you have to go to one end or the other to find the middle ground.
Again, we have the depiction in this particular deck of the apocalypses of white, yellow, and red that we see in the Picatrix of the three men. But I don't know, again, what these colors mean. They're also very present in the Magician, in the Apocalypse, in the Illuminati, and in the Rider-Waite.
I'm sure magicians more skilled than us would be like hand to head, like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. So please, if you're one of those people, comment below and tell us, you know, how amateur we are.
All right, so the next cards that we have up here are the Magician, who we've seen this card before because it's the card of Mercury as co-ruler for a Decan. We've seen it in Taurus 1, Cancer 2, and Virgo 3 so far. As a reminder, Mercury, or the Magician, isn't technically in detriment in Jupiter's realms, but our conversation earlier, they're not really opposing one another, even though they are by actual configuration around the chart. They aren't at, you know, they aren't incompatible, essentially.
Can I read Temperance to you quickly from the White Book of the Daughter of the Reconcilers, Samash? Prop or support. This card is fulfillment of the card Lovers. So maybe that's why that reader that I was talking about uses it as the marriage card, because it's the fulfillment of the Lovers card. Which is really interesting, because remember how you said that we were talking about Mercury and Jupiter in Gemini, and Gemini is the Lovers card. Hey. Yeah. The sign of Sagittarius, the arrow, appears both at the upper left and beneath the disc in the center. The glyph of Capricorn is represented on the left, and the sign of Scorpio on the right, which is both malefics, which I thought is interesting, and I don't know why. The upper background is a volcano erupting, and its ash forms a rainbow extending towards the earth.
Interesting.
The angel of occult wisdom wears, and it doesn't say, you know.
Which angel?
Yes, exactly. Wears a crown of gold, which we see in the Temperance card, right? And pours water from a cup of white gluten into the cauldron. The leopard-faced cauldron is symbolic of fire. Fire burns along the water, and the water extinguishes the fire. Thus, fire and water mix harmoniously, fanned by the slow circulation of air. Here we see all those elements again, created by the slow flapping of wings of the birds. To the left and right of the vessel are triangular symbols for water and fire, respectively. The marriage of fire and water, Shin and Copa, I don't know, I'm sorry, you guys, is held by the power of Saturn, concentrated by Mars. Thus, the glyph of Capricorn ruled by Saturn and Scorpio ruled by Mars. That's really interesting, isn't it?
It is. I need to think about it.
I know. So I don't know, maybe we'll keep this in, maybe we won't, but that was kind of mind-blowing. All right.
Deck, yeah. Okay, so the Magician here, I have a couple depictions of the Magician, which I think is important to see its relationship to alchemy. the Magician as well, having some really strong symbols of that. We have all of the different suits from the tarot cards, the chalice, the sword, the cup, and the wand are each represented in the two cards on the left. We have the Rider-Waite-Smith, we have the Orthodox Russian tarot, and we have the Botticelli tarot deck depicted here. And the one is literally doing alchemy on the far right, so I thought that was appropriate. And of course, Mercury, as co-ruler of this decan, is the messenger god. Just like we said, Iris is his counterpart and might be the figure depicted in Temperance. So what you're getting from the combination of these two cards is definitely some element of messages, quickness of communication in some way happening on a rapid scale. So I think those are some of the things I wanted to highlight about the Magician. I'm not sure if you all have anything else you wanted to say.
I mean, we've talked about the Magician so often that I don't think we need to go super crazy, but we've also got the rose of passion and the white purity. We've also got, you know, the snake consuming its own tail and the as above, so below. And when we're talking about, you know, like quickness of communication, when we're talking about alchemy, like those communicative like quicknesses can happen externally and also internally. Like they represent the as above, so below, right? And as above, so below, again, with the, you know, the Magician's movement of hands, it's very Sagittarian, right? Because you have the man, the above, the spirit, and the below, the ability to sort of turn matter into energy or whatever, right? Yes. You have matter, which is the horse, and then you have it sort of reined and able to sort of execute into an ideal or something like this. So
or in the case of literal alchemy, turning something like, I believe it was tin, which is a Jupiter thing, into gold. That was the as above, so below, like reference even. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, tin is Jupiter, and like, yeah, trying to take, and I think that's really interesting too, because Jupiter being the benefic of the day team and gold being the sun, right? We're trying to take this benefic substance and turn it into something more godlike or more, you know, divine or more, you know, even valuable or something like this.
Mm-hmm.
The quickness associated with Mercury and the swiftness associated with the Eight of Wands speak about how, again, this can be questioned. Like any action that you take with the Eight of Wands influence, you can't keep it up for too long, because again, it will take a lot to just sustain it. And so it is used more efficiently if you keep this idea of swiftness, if you keep this idea of quickness of Mercury in mind.
Absolutely.
And what I mean by that is just like, again, you mentioned there is the river of the High Priestess in this depiction, as well as in the Temperance card. You have to be swift, but you also have to go with your experience. Like that will be helped if you have a lot of truth behind what you're saying. Otherwise, it's not going to be something that you can sustain for very long, and it's not meant to anyway, because it's just a short window of time where you have to make a decision, where you have to make a choice.
And when you think about things that can't be sustained for a long period of time, it's like, in that way, you have to remember the goodness of mutability. Like if you are sending, again, express deliveries, T-Su's and Chang, if you're sending a package, you don't want sustained long-term like energy. You want it to get there and get there fast and swift. Or if you're taking a trip on horseback, right? You want to get there, get to the goal. You don't want it to be a sustained and long, like arduous thing. It's meant to be swift, right? It's meant, the
Yes.
goodness of it is the fact that it's not lasting. You don't want a package to last and last and last in the mail, right? You want it to get there quickly. So yeah, just the idea of the goodness of things being short or swift or quick or something like this. Sometimes you notice this too, like with alchemy, or I could imagine, or at least what I've done, right, when you're doing like little science experiments or little like changing of one, you know, one element into another or something like this, it really happens fast, right? Like you heat it and all of a sudden, whoop, you get the switch or whatever, right?
You've got to pay attention. Yeah.
It's got to be exactly the right thing, but then all of a sudden, boom, you get the shift or whatever. That happens in cooking. It happens like a lot. And then you have to immediately be like, oh, this is a different element now or whatever. And then just thinking about tin, I don't know if you guys have ever worked with the substance tin, but it's quite soft. It's really a soft metal. And then if you think about mercury, even more so, you've got these silver metals that are both like super soft and like mutable and changeable, things like this. So yeah,
that's very interesting. That's a really good point.
Yeah,
associations with the planets.
and you would need to temper something like that, right? Like Mercury, you would need to go under some kind of process, or Jupiter, you need to go under some kind of process for it to become like more stable or more solid. Like again, you think of tempering a sword or something like this, like tin or Mercury would be kind of useless in matters of war or something like this. Whereas like making weapons or arrowheads or, you know, something like that.
Yeah, interestingly, Mercury is also called Quicksilver, which is an ode to its quickness and its malleability. And here, before I go back to the Eight of Wands for a second, I just also wanted to point out a Mercury vibe up here with the infinity symbol above this magician's head with its little wings. It's said that Hermes, Mercury, in Greek, would be flying around with wings on his sandals. So just a little.
Yeah, I wanted to mention the wings on the sandals as well, because it's another vehicle for travel. It's like the feet are moving so quick. It's like almost like you have little winged chariots on your feet.
On your feet. Literal. It's literal. So now we have a few depictions of the Eight of Wands, which is kind of the Lord of Swiftness, the results of Temperance and the Magician together. On the far left is the Rider-Waite-Smith depiction, which should look fairly familiar. And what David was mentioning, the river that runs in the background through it, consistently a reference to actually the co-ruler for next Decan will be the moon, represented by the High Priestess. So we can take a closer look at Temperance and the High Priestess in the next Decan. But one of the very traditional meanings of this card, again, we see this association with messages and the post, the safe movement of things, the safe transport of things. So that makes perfect sense, again, when we're thinking about Hermes and Iris, the god and goddess of messages, kind of resulting in this Lord of Swiftness. And so there's inherent movement happening in that Eight of Wands happening here. We see that there is no human in this Rider-Waite-Smith card, which is something else that David mentioned earlier. This and the Three of Swords, which was Libra 2, and that's the card whose co-ruler is Saturn, and it's the heart with the three swords through it. Very memorable depiction. So these two cards, the Eight of Wands and the Three of Swords, T. Susan Chang mentions, are actually very good for magic, very potent for magical talismans. Because there are no humans on the card, it kind of expedites the very specific motion or energy of that card. So essentially, I thought this was such a cool idea. She used depictions of this, and she makes them. She sells these on Etsy, talismans that have the Eight of Wands on them that are meant to go on your luggage, for instance, if you're traveling, to facilitate the speedy and quick and safe delivery or movement of an item.
Absolutely love it. Using it on all my mail, using it. Love it. She's a genius. She's also the one that taught us about 10 needles for the tens of swords and things like this. She's, you know, we love you, T. Susan Chang. I guess I know. The one thing I wanted to just mention is about the swift movement between, when we're talking about Iris or we're talking about Hermes, they were able to be in, you know, Olympus, and also in the realm of humans, and also in the realm of Hades, right? So again, the mutability and the swiftness. And when you said like this card doesn't have human form, I was kind of thinking it in that way too, like you are the form, or like that alchemical form that it can kind of float through the world of man or gods or whatever, swiftly or directly or something like this. So again, that shamanistic feel or that alchemical feel of the magician or the messenger being able to sort of transcend the worlds, which I think we transcend when we don't depict a human here too, because it's not the land of necessarily the human realm.
Yeah. In the middle of this slide, we have a picture from the Botticelli deck, the Golden Renaissance Botticelli deck, which is Cupid with his bow and arrow. Another very strong theme we're seeing in this Decan is the bow and arrow. And this is Cupid aiming his bow and arrow downwards, something below that we can't actually see. But what's really interesting about this is it's going to be illuminated even better later on, but the closing poem for this chapter in T. Susan Chang's book is from the Shakespeare play A Midsummer Night's Dream. And it's when one of the characters is ordering Puck, who's actually a depiction of, it's a version of Cupid, very much taken also from the tradition of Hermes or Mercury, in that it's a god of tricks and deception and playing little pranks and things like this. That is the figure that we have here in the Eight of Wands card. If I said Eight of Cups, I'm sorry. Did I do that earlier?
Is it that character or play that people are in a forest and they get lost for a whole night?
Yes.
Okay.
And then the character of Puck, which you can kind of imagine it is flying around messing with people.
Yeah.
And so it's a great, if you haven't seen it, it's also an opera. It's amazing. You can watch it in a lot of different forms, but it's, I think, a really beautiful depiction for this Decan.
Yeah, I find a lot of similarity between Cupid and Mercury, or the messenger, and this being like a messenger of love, but has like there's always like this trickster energy of being shot with Cupid's arrow, or it always has like a dichotomy.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I think is beautiful in this is that when we were talking about, and I'm not sure if this part will get left in the video or not, when we were talking earlier about the alchemical process of temperance being the conclusion of the lovers. So you have, like, and that's maybe why it's called the marriage card, right? Is it's kind of the conclusion of the lovers card, and then you see Cupid and that sort of trickster, like love energy, or that like swiftness of love brought in the minors too. So I think there's some crossover with the alchemical temperance in that way too.
Yeah. And then in the far right, we have the Mother Peace deck. We have a depiction of the Eight of Wands being, guess what? Bows and arrows with flaming tips. If that's not a literal depiction of what we were talking about earlier, I don't know what is. But it's also apparently a woman that's part horse.
But it's really interesting. I mean, we can't get away from the air, like even the eight that has the wands, it's like they're flying through the air, right? It's like their arrows, like in my mind, they're arrows anyway. So it's like we can't get away from this bow and arrow nature, the swiftness of the message coming through, or the potential of it having, you know, some trickery or some fire latent sort of explosive, like aha moment, or like you're never going to be the same once you're pricked by Cupid arrow, or you know, that kind of flaming enlightenment or message that's coming through fast.
That's so true. Yeah, it's all happening fast. And that's actually something that I want to talk about after talking about these three cards, is the kind of advice of this card that Chang gives that I 1000 and 20% agree with, is that this is sort of a sign, if you get it in a reading, that it is not, it's good to think about the big picture and not make hasty decisions, but even more than that, it's important not to wait and not to brood about it. It's important to seize the moment to actually take action, because that action might be, meaningless after this moment in time. It's like taking up arms quickly. And the reason for that could be a little bit tied to the science deck that we have on the far left here, which shows the Eight of Wands as the Big Bang, which is what we commonly think of as the beginning of the universe, where one massive burst of generative creative energy basically resulted in all life as we know it. And there are still things moving, spiraling outwards in the broader universe as a result of this Big Bang, however many billions of years ago. So you think about that as the swiftness was in fact the moment of the Big Bang and the things that are continuing to move afterwards, but it was such a moment that it had to happen at that time. It had to happen then, or else it wasn't going to happen. It was the perfect combination of factors that resulted in the Big Bang.
And again, that's alchemy, right? Like you're heating, you're bringing in all the right things, and then boom, you get the change. Boom, you get the bang. Like it's that swift, right now energy. The arrow hits, there.
Yeah. In the middle, in the Sakapini deck, I actually had to ask for Elsa's help a little bit interpreting this, because I wasn't really sure what this card was trying to say in relation to these ideas of alchemy and swiftness. But what we see are like three depictions of, I guess, couples doing things. In one case, at the very bottom in the foreground, which I think is what we're supposed to assume is the present, there is a youth making a proclamation of love, it looks like, for this woman, perhaps very hastily, perhaps without thinking it through very far. Right above that are a picture of what we assume to be the same couple in the same colored clothing, fighting, bickering, clawing at each other. And then at the very top, we see two children playing, again, in the same colors. That seems to be like it could be, either their own children or themselves as younger people. And the idea of this being that you don't want to make too rapid or hasty of a decision, just based on, things of the moment. And these two figures are actually surrounded on all sides by grapevines, and grapevines that are intended to make wine, theoretically. And the moment that wine is ready is, it's brief. It's a couple days. Wines are very finicky. The vineyards that are famous for their wine are renowned because of the exact makeup of their soil, the chemical composition of their soil, the variety of grapes, in fact, the heredity of the grapes that they're making it with. It's all very precise and very exact, so that when the time comes to pick the grapes and make the wine, it's that decisive moment that it happens.
And the alchemy, the moment of alchemy, right? And maybe that's what I would call it if I had to name it or something like that.
Yeah, the moment of alchemy.
Yeah. And again, we see that I guess the more negative depiction of Mercury here, which is marry me hastily, or scrapping and fighting, saying things that we can't take back, but it happens fast and swift, and running, and all of those things. Those are kind of the chaos of love. Again, the love thing happening because of the lovers and the alchemy of the Temperance card, but then just kind of the degeneration of Mercury, or the alchemical process of the wine, like you were saying. And wine is also used in lots of religious ritual, and in shamanistic rites of passage, or in divination, or in cults, ritual and things like that. So again, to me, it's that Mercury Jupiter together thing, the alchemy of the moment, and the good alchemy of wine. Your wine can go bad if you don't pay attention to the details in the moment, like you were saying. And then also being wine is represented as the blood of Christ, and all of these things, right? In many cultures, you have these fermentations used in religious ritual, which is that Jupiterian like aspect again. And like if the lovers aren't paying attention to the Jupiterian nature, they're going to be, you know, hasty and quarreling and chasing and all of those things.
The last card on the far right that I wanted to talk about is from the Micah Ulrich deck. This is very different from a lot of the other cards that we've seen depicted here, but I saw something special in this. The wands are actually represented by the sunflowers in this card, and almost all of the wand minor arcana cards in this deck. So that's very interesting. But you take a look at the figure, which to be fair, the whole deck is dotted with skeletons, but in this case, it's a skeleton holding the scythe that very much looks like death. So I think this is an interesting card here because of the fact that this is the beginning of the last sign leading up to a solstice. In some parts of the world, it's the winter solstice, some parts of the world is the summer solstice, and you can see a little bit of both of that represented in this card. We have the sunflowers for the summer solstice. We have what looks like death could even be, you could turn it the other way around, turn it upside down and see like he's cutting the sunflowers, like it's the end of the season, so the winter solstice. And so I just thought that this was a very interesting depiction in that way, and is a reminder of where we are in the year.
Yeah, absolutely. The again, that sun, death, like Saturnalia, like passing of the light again that we see it quarterly.
Totally. All right, those were all the cards that I had for today.
Awesome, thank you, Katie. That was really fun. This is really fun. Like this is such a shift of energy. Sagittarius, this is a breath of fresh air. We love you.
Way fewer trigger warnings this time.
Oh yeah, right. And so I just wanted to do little honorable mentions. We've got this is one of my favorite cards in the Santa Muerte deck, which I use in this season, you know, coming out of Scorpio season and into Capricorn season through the dark part of the year. Beautiful like depiction of the Magician, and just for fun, the Temperance card. I just love this deck. I should, you know what, I probably should send you the photos so you can put them up there nicely on the screen so that everybody can see. And the very complicated, you know, Temperance and Magician nativities.
Ooh, there are some good ones. I'm gonna read off a couple of my favorites. For this sign, there are people who, I mean, okay, I love Sagittarii, and I've never particularly thought that Mercury in Sagittarius was a bad placement or like difficult at all. I love my Mercury Sag friends. And these people to me seem quite mercurial, that I'm going to read off here, despite being Sag suns. I think that because they were born during this Decan, they might have a stronger Mercury presence than one would think, regardless of their actual Mercury sign. So I think of Bill Nye, who is he's basically a presenter and communication aficionado of science, you know, regardless of some of the questions we may have about him. Some of his,
right, I know there's like controversies, but that's a part of this Decan, right? Controversy.
Absolutely.
And then also with Bill Nye, what he was geared towards children, which is a mercurial thing.
Yes.
Like in the beginnings of his career, I don't know, like how
learning and teaching to some extent, which are actually two sides of the Jupiter-Mercury dichotomy, is the teacher and the student. The learning, like higher learning and the primary education type of learning are associated with that as well. And similarly, we have Jon Stewart, who kind of was a comedian that became a de facto, or I should say de jure journalist, essentially, reporting, actually doing some very solid reporting on some very difficult things during the early part of this century. Gave me big Mercury vibes.
Yeah, two of my favorites on the list are Bruce Lee, because of that sort of like action-oriented part of the Mercury Sag thing that we see here, with like the poison arrow and the swiftness and the arrow and the, you know, persona of like martial arts, just being like float like a butterfly, sting like a bee kind of thing, you know. And then Pablo Escobar, which I think is really interesting because he's like basically trafficking, you know, And I think trafficking has a lot to do with like package sending and like express deliveries and like things like this, and on the nefarious poisoned arrow side of the equation.
100%.
I like Miley Cyrus because Hannah Montana. You kind of have that double character there where she, yeah, and I'm not saying just the character, she had to play because of her contract with Disney, she had to play the nice girl role while being bombarded by the media, you know, and anything that she did that was remotely out of line, she was deemed as irresponsible by the media, and she had to really cope with that throughout her teens.
I think she really shows that kind of rebellion as well, like that Mercury, that's innate to Mercury, like just kind of being like, I'm not the nice kid or whatever, you know?
Yeah. And Sag, I do see Sagittarius in general as an archetype where rebellion finds a pretty good expression.
And I just want to say, even though she's not a nativity, Britney Spears has her Mercury in this deck in conjunct Uranus and her part of Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of her personality comes from this particular part of the zodiac. She's also Sagittarius, but her sun is in the next Decan. But even her Mercury being here with a lot of Spirit and Uranus just gives this sense of being rebellious. And when she tried to speak out, everything else happened in her life. And she was
the idea of
impeded.
swiftly speaking out, or like being in those like rebellion roles, or not being heard, or like kind of that whole poison Mercury thing.
Yeah, because Mercury itself is debilitated in her chart, and that gives her personality and her life story a particular characteristic that is not so favorable for her.
And just so you know, like David's really familiar with Brittany's chart and did a talk with Afan on Brittany's chart. So that'll be posted to your channel, won't it, if it's not already?
Yeah, no, I have to record it to post it on my channel, a different video, and maybe it'll be a little bit longer where I can explain the concept a little better. So I'm still working on that, but yeah.
But it will be up, like we will, you know, Brittany's a really good like case study that David's done a lot of work on, so.
And this first Decan is just present there in this idea of trying to speak out your truth, and also having the media portraying her as a, you know, irresponsible person, as someone who really couldn't control their own life, couldn't control their own spirits, couldn't be in control of their own life, basically. This was an image painted by the media that was independent of the experience that people had of her.
You know, I find that to be a commonality as well, that Jupiter or Sagittarius especially, but Jupiter, Sagittarius, and Mercury share again, is that like you're too wild, or you're too unpredictable, or you're too rebellious, or you don't have control of your, you know, animal nature.
Cyrus went through the same thing. It's almost like the spitting image of what Brittany went through from an abstract, not the details, but yeah.
Yeah, like kind of condemning like and it can have like a wild party nature, like you mentioned, but kind of like condemning, like damned if you do, damned if you don't, kind of like we want you to be some ideal of Jupiter that you're not being, that you've corrupted, that you've poisoned, or, you know, something like this, like and yeah, just the idea of rebellion are both Sagittarian and Mercurial. It's another kind of like crossover.
And again, everything in Britney Spears' life was always so wild, so unpredictable. If you look at it, her luck is always changing so rapidly. She went from a very small town girl with no chance in life to worldwide phenomenon. And I say no chance in life. Her parents invested in her future, yes, but they were very poor. They went into debt to invest in her future. It wasn't like they were pouring out money into her career since the start. She had some lucky breaks.
And they're like viral, you know, and I know we're talking about Brittany next Decan, but we're talking about her Mercury here now, you guys, that's what we're doing. But, you know, the idea of like Mercury being debilitated, like David said, but like going viral, or like you know, she shaved her head and she went crazy on the paparazzi again, paparazzi being
and
Mercury.
even to this day, like she's releasing music. She hasn't released anything in years and had this whole thing happen. But even when she releases new music with Elton John, and was there anything new besides the Elton John song?
Not that I know of.
Not that, yeah, I don't think so. But the new Elton John song was a huge success from the go. Everything that she touches becomes gold, basically. Yeah, this is an appreciation of Britney Spears' channel. I hope you guys enjoy this.
Yeah, and we'll probably bring her up again next time. But back to the sun in this Decan, which another one that I like is Mark Twain, because of the idea of, you know, writing and storytelling, which we get, you know, from Mercury, but like that big picture, the big imagination, like the adventure or whatever. That we see.
Yeah, same with C.S. Lewis is another nativity here. He too has that big adventure-minded gift for writing.
Yeah, right. And again, that's the big and the little. You have to have this big overarching plot, but then you have to build these like depthy, and picking every word right, and the depth of character and the minute details of the character. So that's why I think that, you know, there is some marriage or alchemy that happens between the debilities of Jupiter and Mercury because of things like this. You have to have a big mind, a big imagination, a big story to tell, and then do it in these ways that are like very precise in order to get your characters across and things like that, you know, and to build that, you know, love of the detail, of the juiciness of wanting to turn every page to get like this bigger story. We have Chadwick Boseman,
R.I.P.
forever. Just, you know, do we have anything to say about like this specific, you know, Decan for Chadwick?
I just thought that there was like real kind of well, one of the reasons why I think he was such a great Black Panther is that his bearings, he was very like, he seemed very wise in his like depiction of this action hero, which to me is very Sagittarian. You know, it has that centaur energy of being like kind of visionary, very like inspired in some ways, but then you've got the ability to fight, and I wouldn't say a bloodlust, but you know, in Black Panther, just like ability and willingness to like come out.
Well, a panther is very swift.
Yes,
and it's also able to go in the shadows and like not be seen, right? It's fast and it comes from nowhere, right? This Black Panther coming in the night, just, you know, that kind of thing is like very mercurial. And then the idea of Wakanda being this like magical place of alchemy, right? And they have this like substance, this like quicksilver like substance, this magical like potent substance that could change the entire world, but is sort of like hidden. And again, that hidden element is that mercurial element again.
Very appropriate.
So DJ Khaled, oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, that's a great one. DJ Khaled's great. I was going to mention Billy the Kid, which I think is really funny. It's a figure from the Old West. And what I think is particularly funny about that is the kind of like where we see people like C.S. Lewis and Mark Twain being like acting in this Mercury way, but having this Jupiter vision. This is somebody like acting in a Jupiter way, like going out to far reaches of the country to explore the expanse, and like, you know, adopting this like storied saga of him and his cohort that he ran with, like Calamity Jane and Doc Holliday and stuff. So Billy the Kid, though, being referred to as the Kid, which is a Mercury thing, and also having a Mercury mindset in that he was all about robbing people. He was a poker fiend that like won most of his money and property in games like this. So it's like kind of the opposite of the Mercury Jupiter arrangement in figures like C.S. Lewis and Mark Twain.
Yeah, I love that, because like the idea of the Wild West we think horses and arrows, or horses and
There you
dogs,
go.
same thing, right? Like, and the wild expanse, the wild, wild west, like that is Sagittarius. Wild, wild west, that's Sag all the way, like open expanse, adventures, like dangers around, lurking around every corner, that sort of thing. And you obviously have horses, like that's the main thing, is thinking about like horses, maybe buffalo. I mean, for me, buffalo. But. And then, yeah, exactly, the kid. To have your name have the kid in it is like the most mercurial thing ever. Gambling, smoking, tricking, drinking, robbing, that's all like that. There you go.
God of deception, trickster god there. So
yeah. And then just quickly, I mean, we've got Scarlett Johansson. I said DJ Khaled. We've got Tina Turner.
we got some Bette Midler, Sarah Silverman, Jimi Hendrix, Winston Churchill's kind of an interesting one, as well as Lucky Luciano.
I mean, I guess for me, Jimi Hendrix stands out as like, you know, you have this bigness of the music and this bigness of the reputation, like a very psychedelic in nature, which is kind of, again, that shamanistic, alchemical, like the wide expanse of the mind or the psyche or something like this. And the idea of the guitar is very mercurial. You've got both hands moving and both, you know, and it's just kind of like speaking for you. Very Jupiterian, Mercury, and music. I mean, music is art, like, right? And then music is also alchemy. So,
and like Boseman, it's an artist who burned very bright and hot, but quickly.
Too short, yeah. Also, the unfortunate passing of Chadwick, like, he is, because of the way that he passed, may his soul rest in peace, he has a very respect, like almost like, I don't want to say respected, but just like stoic or something.
He has a legacy that's like very,
yeah, like he didn't bother anyone with the news. He sort of suffered it or bared it in silence in order to keep up this like Jupiterian image in the public or whatever. And to me, that again talks about like kind of the secret of Mercury, like this little tiny thing like eating away at your body, but you maintain this like stoic, godlike,
kind of a noble stance.
There you go. That's it. Yeah, like a noble kind of.
You have a Jupiterian word here, nobility of spirit, of being like, yeah, basically putting the ideal on top of your physical reality. It's like, no, I will use my mind to control my reactions to whatever is happening to my body to maintain a particular ideal or whatever. Yeah, much like kings and queens in the past do. They have to fake being all right. Like the queen, she was receiving the prime minister, but she knew she was dying.
You know, that's,
you know, she like
perfectly put. And we haven't brought that word up, but that's a perfect word, like the nobility. And that's perfect for Chadwick, wasn't it? And that's exactly what I was thinking of, is like carrying yourself like a king or queen, not letting the little details of what's happening, like the little, you know, biological.
Which are not little.
No, they're not. But if you think of like what causes cancer or something, it's these small infections, these viruses.
Yeah, but again, it's the higher ideal that you maintain. The passion here in the color of the wings of the Rider-Waite, they're red. And this is a different depiction of the Rider-Waite. It's a kind of weird one, but it's the one I have. But it's also red, like the classic one. And it's about the passions that elevate our spirit and being able to use that. Like this is Sagittarius, it's a fire sign again. So what's elevating this spirit is to the higher ideals is the passion, you know, of the soul.
And that's completely Chadwick Boseman. Like you hold yourself like a king or a queen. You hold yourself as this highest ideal of like how, you know, you're representing this thing for these children. Again, like this character for these children that's like immortalized or something like this. And it's very much like a king or a queen or a noble act or a righteous sort of like standing on your ideal and not the details. Perfectly put, yeah. Well, I think that brings us to our conclusion of Sagittarius I. Thank you, Sagittarius, for being here, and thanks for everybody else for watching and following through the Decans. Let's get to 300. And you can find David Fisher at inthefirstplaceastrology.com. You can find KD Dayton at kddayton.com. And they also have a plethora of other places to find them on Twitter and Instagram. You can also find us in the About section of this page.
And please do check out our other services. We have a Patreon page for the Hellenistic Astrology channel, which has some exclusive goods for anyone who wants to check it out. You guys can acquire the artwork for these thumbnails on YouTube. You guys can participate on our study group of Demetria George's Volume 2 of Ancient Astrology. So whoever wants to check that out.
Yeah, and come for readings with us. You know, we're willing to work with people on all budgets, and our Patreon reflects that as well. We have a tier for any budget. So, okay, y'all, we love you, and we hope you're really celebrating this, climax or kind of, part of the year, shall we say. All right, KD, do you want to ring us out with a poem?
Yeah, sure. I referenced this earlier. So the poem at the end of this chapter is actually a snippet from Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. It's Act 3, Scene 2. And in this scene, Oberon, who's the king of the fairies, says, "About the wood go swifter than the wind, and Helena of Athens look thou find. All fancy sick she is, and pale of cheer, with sighs of love that costs the fresh blood dear. By some illusion see thou bring her here, I'll charm his eyes against she do appear." And Puck, our Cupid, he goes, I go, look how I go, swifter than arrow from the Tartar's bow." Aim for the stars.
All right, y'all, see you at Sag 2. Ciao.
Mataya matao kako bersamayo demikian soba da soba kena mataiba nakau di mawa demikian soba dan soba ataiba nake ujuna baikana kamaya da ongai koyo okoyo masena mata ibe kana sabaso inakina tabaine toyogas inbayetoma tabaike Tabaike, Tino no Lakano Yoga.